Day 919 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 613,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,200 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 3 tanks, 23 APVs, 23 artillery, and 1 air defense system. This time it was a Russian Buk M3 air defense system, destroyed in the Kherson region. Then headed to the map with a bit of a shorter video today, perhaps a slight change of pace as well. And starting out in the Donbass, where recent news media articles have been making the claim that Russia has occupied 40% of Chasiv Yar, which was a bit perplexing to hear. So looking at the town on the map, it is true to say that the Russian forces have reached up to the canal, where they subsumed a small exclave settlement to the east of the canal, although the majority of the town is on the western side of said canal, unoccupied and under Ukrainian control. Of course, if these media outlets that say these things just presume that the contact point lines are somehow representative of the town and its borders, then I can understand how they arrive at that unusual figure. But the reality is quite different, as we see right here. But as for the ongoing activity in this region, it's a case of trickle-in warfare, as Russian soldiers more often than not try to cross the canal at a few limited points, limiting their ability to overpower the AFU as they may otherwise normally attempt to do. But of course, in this case, the entry into the town is not conducive to the use of Russian typical meat wave assault strategies, with so few points to pass through. Then headed to the Pokrovsk sector on the map, as the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Kursk, has been working with brigades on the military strategy for the region. Now, Kursk stated that the fighting is exceptionally brutal in this region, as the enemy throws everything they can to move and advance into the battle, trying to break through the defenses of the Ukrainian troops. And with Russia attempting to reach Pokrovsk, it was just back in July I referred to the Russian army in this sector as going to be given it a quote-unquote red-hot go. Now, as per Kursk, Ukraine's main goal is to strengthen the defense in the most difficult areas of the front and to provide brigades with sufficient amounts of ammunition and other equipment. Ukraine has their work cut out for them, although as current they are expected to have, on the balance of probabilities, enough resources to stabilize this sector, but by no means guaranteed. And so I would also envisage some unpopular decisions to be made in this region, depending on how the situation progresses. For example, stay and fight in certain frontline battles or withdraw as appropriate, whilst limiting the loss of Ukrainian soldiers in the process. Then moving away from this 150 square kilometers of Russian land gained in the last 30 days, we'll head across to that 1,300 square kilometer value of land gains in the past 30 days. Except of course in this case with Ukraine on the receiving end of that amount of new control. With a few brief things to mention here. Now, just yesterday, at the time of my upload, there were some reports of Ukrainian armed forces who struck the railway at Lvov, although it appears to be more of a case of internal sabotage, and more likely done so with some improvised tools, in the absence of any blast marks. Unfortunately for the internal saboteurs, this kind of damage is easily enough fixed, but what we do still see from time to time from the AFU and other internal partisans is the targeting of electric rail substations, locomotives, bridges, signaling control boxes, and maintenance facilities for more of a long-term impact. And then to jump straight into Russian actions in this region, where Russian authorities are forming armed volunteer units in the oblast amid Ukraine's incursion, with acting governor Alexei Smirnov, who announced the creation of these detachments, for those of which who will receive some training and weapons to provide security in evacuated areas. They'll work closely with the Russian army and also defend areas threatened by advancing Russian forces. So well done, Russia. You've just maneuvered your way around the burdening cost of paying soldiers, setting up instead these volunteer forces that will end up performing the exact same duties as the regular army, except for being even less trained and less equipped, leading to a moralometer for these units that is probably not even measured in months, but just mere weeks. And it should go without mention, but last time Russia had one too many volunteer border forces in the Kursk Oblast, it didn't work out too well for them. And this is also notable because even the paid contractors of the regular Russian army are bickering about getting paid different sign-up amounts based on the region where they enlisted, with quite a few Russian videos on that topic now. And truly, for these new units that hunker down at frontline defending positions, taking on fire, doing it as a freebie service, is going to get real old real quick. So I don't see a lot of success in that approach. But moving along, because where the Russian MOD is successful in Kursk, at least on paper, is where they claim 380 Ukrainian personnel losses in one day, then 400 in the next, all just in Kursk. But more than that, I can't help but chuckle about their two most recent days of stats that don't even tally the total counts correctly. But let's give them an A for effort. And then speaking of unpaid or untrained soldiers from just a moment ago, Russian propagandist Sladkov has criticized some Russian servicemen for surrendering en masse in the Kursk region. Perhaps Sladkov himself should go to the front lines and face the same conditions as these men did, these conscripts did. And I'm really not even kidding, because Sladkov never took part in battles, was never on the front lines, and has spent his entire life engaged in PR and propaganda of generals and of the Russian MOD. You've been talking the talk a bit too much there, buddy. Time to walk the walk. Then somewhere in the east, we've seen quite the uptick of AFU drone on Russian drone neutralizations. Because in the last month, the AFU hit a startling 115 Russian reconnaissance drones, a feat which would have taken previously a year to accomplish. And we would certainly also expect this number to rise per month, as Ukraine's military is becoming increasingly skilled in this arena, where they're becoming perhaps the world's #1 in small drone warfare, if not already at the top. Then headed all the way up into Russia, up the very north, Leningrad Oblast, or St. Petersburg. So, in a change of pace, partisan groups have reported that the Russian multi-million-dollar Pantsir S-1 air defense systems are guarding the Russian Interior Ministry Department in St. Petersburg now. A move they criticize as very foolish, given Ukraine's recent border breakthroughs and the shortage of air defense systems at the front. They also noted that the Moscow and St. Petersburg areas are the most heavily protected cities, all the while frontline cities like Kursk, Bryansk, and Belgorod are left vulnerable. And these such partisan groups also shared the coordinates of these located Pantsir S-1 systems. So this pulling back of crucial air defenses from the front to protect the northern capitals is something that I do from time to time foreshadow as a large-scale impending event for Russia, as these systems are not only crucial for any military structure, they are also some seriously finite platforms. And when an aggressor country runs low on them, all of a sudden, what do? Pull them back to protect the little guy at the top, which is already by no means an understatement, as Putin already has multiple air defense batteries protecting his own residences, plural, many of which have been seen in the last 40 days or so to be not even strategically placed, and rather instead just accumulated at a single location. As was the case when we saw this recently at Putin's Valdai residence north of Moscow, containing Pantsirs and S-300/400 systems. Then we'll head across into Russia's Rostov Oblast, as the Atlas oil depot that was struck in Kamensky is already on day number 3 of its continued burning. Add to that, the authorities in Rostov are very silent about the attack on this oil depot, which is somewhat surprising given that, so far, the smoke has carried itself up to 30 kilometers away from the site. But not to be outdone, the oil depot in Proletask is now just seeming to finish off its 13th day of burn-in, with it still being a little bit smoky. It was one of Russia's largest single oil reserve locations within Russia before this event happened, which is where 12 or 13 days of blazing activity starts to add up and make sense here. Oh, and just for a bit of clarity on this topic, as it's usually a bit of a misnomer to call it an oil depot, per se, as what's typically held here instead is all the effort that went into the finished product, that is to say, the refined petroleum products instead. Diesel, gasoline, and the like. And so the last 3 months alone has been quite heated on this front, where it starts to become quite difficult to keep track of these events, leading to my motivation for bringing back the oil depot and oil refinery tallies from just earlier this year, when the ball really started to get rolling on this front. And I remember seeing in the comments a few of you seem to like that, so yeah, let me know if you want me to bring that one back. Then headed across to a bit of news for today, so starting off, back in the news with some positive outlooks for the AFU is how the gold standard of artillery shells, the 155mm NATO shell production ramp up, is ahead of schedule in the US, where it has now hit almost 80,000 shells per month in production this fall, outpacing the target of 70,000 per month. Now, this outcome was achieved through a particular focus on mostly just the production of the 155mm caliber shells, allowing for that ramp up in production. The well-known Scranton Army ammunition plant, all alone, has boosted shell production by 50%, putting them at almost 40,000 shells produced per month. And you might be wondering, so just to contrast it with Europe's output levels as of now, where they sit on about 50 to 55,000 155mm shells per month. With both the collective group of nations that is Europe and the US, so these two groups, each aiming to achieve a 1.2 million shell output rate per year. Then moving along in the news, because then of course there was the crash loss of the F-16 fighter jet inside of Ukraine, with not a great many details known on that situation as yet, more leading to speculation. No doubt, however, is that Russia will be chomping at the bit about this news, and will probably even claim ownership of the incident, which is perhaps a statistical improbability given that the jet's known whereabouts reported for the crash was far behind any front lines and positioned in Kyiv. But either way, the event will be propagandized by Russia, that is for certain. Ironically, without them considering that their own jet losses at a rate of about almost once per fortnight now is a continuing trend that they should be more concerned about. But as for this latest event, I do look forward to the official report as it relates to the investigation of the crash. Then of course there was also further F-16 news at around the same time, where Dutch Defense Minister Ruben Brekelmans confirmed that the Dutch provided F-16s may be deployed by Ukraine over Russian territory. Now, it's a tricky topic from a geopolitical standpoint, but in the very least, it can mean that the Dutch jets could target Russian military assets by firing from just beyond the Ukraine border. Beyond meaning behind in that context. So that's going to have to be a wrap for me today, guys. You may have noticed my videos in the last few days may have been getting perhaps a little shorter and certainly published a little later. So what I'm going to do is catch up on some sleep to avoid the burnout, so I can reset and start fresh. So leaving it there, but just as a quick shout out to my supporters on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee and on YouTube, you are my shining light of continued motivations and smiles, and I cannot thank you all enough. So thanks again, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!